Heat tolerance is an important subject that's coming up regularly in conversation, not just within the Angus world, but across the agricultural sector. So why is it important to understand heat tolerance and being able to handle heat? One thing we need to understand is Angus cattle are a temperate breed. They were originated in Scotland. They've been out in Australia for nearly 200 years now via Tasmania. So there is some acclimatisation going on, that's for sure, in Australia compared to Scotland. However, we do need to appreciate that they are a temperate breed, a Bos taurus breed, compared to our Bos indicus class of cattle. So the first thing is we need to understand they're originated from a temperate environment, and that's where they're most suited. Also thinking about that they are acclimatised in the Australian production system for quite a while. In regards to heat tolerance, one thing we're definitely seeing is more Angus genetics heading north in northern Australia. The reason for that is because Angus cattle are very good in crossbreeding systems, for pollness, for market acceptance, for carcass quality, for fertility, for a range of things. There obviously offers some advantages, but one thing we need to be aware of again is in northern Australia, in those tropical and subtropical climates, that it's a hotter environment. So how do our temperate cattle like Angus and Angus influence cattle handle that heat? So we really need to understand that. The other thing we need to be aware of is climates, and particularly the heat, is increasing over time due to climate change. Scientifically proven, we're all aware of this. So the average temperature is going up, but most importantly, we're seeing more extreme heat events as well. So with more extreme heat events, how are our Angus and our Angus influence cattle going to handle that going forward? So that's where we need to understand this trait in more detail. Before we get there though, we need to think about how does heat impact on beef production? So particularly if beef cattle are under heat stress. So first of all, they'll reduce their feed consumption, they don't eat as much. This will reduce their overall production obviously if there's quite a few heat events back to back, decreased growth rates for example. They can have lower meat quality, particularly if they have heat stress close to the point of slaughter obviously. Can impact on reproductive performance in cows and in bulls if they're heat stressed. In extreme cases we can obviously increase mortality, so deaths, so that's something to be aware of. All these things can lead into welfare implications and obviously consumer concerns if cattle aren't suited to the environment, and brings in that discussion around social licence. So one thing we need to be aware of about heat tolerance though is we see variation in beef cattle. So the picture there shows the variation we probably think about, the Bos taurus compared to Bos indicus. So Bos taurus cattle generally have lower heat tolerance than Bos indicus cattle. Bos indicus cattle come and were originated from those hotter climates, so we expect that, and that's due to a range of internal and external factors. But what we're talking about today is the heat tolerance variation we see within the Angus breed, so within a Bos taurus breed. And we know there's variation there, and the aim for this would be then, as an organisation like Angus Australia, can we describe and measure that variation where the end goal is to produce a breeding value, an EBV for heat tolerance for Angus cattle. So again, when we're setting genetics into those hotter environments, or our environment is heating up itself, where we're breeding them, that we can start putting some selection pressure on this particular trait, so we're ahead of the game as such. There's a range of ways you can measure heat tolerance or things related to heat tolerance. One is Coates type score, and I'll talk more about that today because that's where we've done a bit of initial work. We can talk things like hair shedding score, which is what they do in America, and I've got the scoring system there for you. You can see that a score of 5 would be the animals have still got their full winter coat in that coming out of winter and into spring, down to 1 which have the slick short summer coat. That's another way you can look at this particular trait or something that's related to this trait. You can then obviously try to measure things directly as well, like temperatures of cattle, core temperatures, rectal surface temperatures. And another way you can look at it is how is the performance of animals affected during heat events? So if you've got animals in a feed intake facility, then how is their feed intake affected when they go through a heat type event? And we can well describe what heat events mean, which I won't go into detail today. So that's what we're looking at, but the initial step was to let's just look at something we've been measuring for a while, particularly in our reference population, our sire benchmarking program, coat type, and just start getting an understanding of it. So first of all, talking about collecting coat scores, the first thing we'd like to mention is we've done some initial analysis of this, which I'll share with you today, but we want people to, if they're interested in this trait for themselves and their clients, to record the trait themselves and submit that if they're Angus members. and submit it into our TACE evaluation. So first of all, we've got a good documentation on the website about that in the Angus Education Centre, so jump on and grab that document and you'll learn more about that. But to describe a little bit today, we're just using a simple coat type scoring system of 1 to 7, where 1 would be extremely short, would be like our Bos Indicus and our tropically adapted cattle, very slick, very short haired. 2 would be very short, again slick, short hair, but you could lift it a little bit up with your thumb if you ran your finger along the animal. 3 being slightly longer and slightly coarser, so you can lift the hair quite easily. And 4 being where it's starting to curl up a little bit and showing a bit more coarseness and going up the scale from there. If we're looking back at those 2 bulls we looked at the start, you'd see the bull there with coat score 2 compared to a bull there with coat score 4, for example. So you can see there as 2 examples of what the coat scores would look like. We'll also share with you soon in this presentation what sort of distribution we see in the scores we've been collecting, so you know what to sort of expecting Angus cattle if you're scoring them yourself. But I think the descriptions are fairly well descriptive. In regards to scoring coat type in a bit more detail, if you're looking to do this coat type scoring, you would do all animals in a contemporary group on the same day with the same scorer. Similar to other score traits like docility or calving years and those sorts of things. In regards to the age ranges, you look to score the animals between 370 and 150 days of age. That's the analysis we're looking at the moment. And you'd look to score the animals in late spring or early summer. So why you do the animals there is because you're looking at a shedding characteristic as well. Those animals that are losing hair compared to those that hold on some coat. And most of the scores we've got on file are in that sort of range, but you need to think about adjusting that depending on the age of the animals, whether you're autumn calving or spring calving. So still doing that spring or early summer, but that age range of 300 to 750 allows you to really do that no matter where you're calving as such. In regards to variation as well, it's important that you get some variation in the scoring, so we don't want all scores 2, for example. And to be honest, I've never seen a group of cattle where they're all the same score for coat type, so I don't think it'd be too hard to get some variation in all groups of cattle. Half scores are also allowed, so if you sort of think, he sort of lies between a 3 and a 4, or she does, or a 2 and a 3, then you can go to half scoring as well, and that's utilising the analysis. So first of all, in regards to what we're seeing, we've analysed the data we've got on file already, and we've been collecting through our research programs and a little bit of member data. So what we're up to now in regards to this research is we have analysed the coat type scores we've got on file with Angus Australia, and there's about 6,000 of those, mainly from our reference population program, the SIRE benchmarking program. And we released those research breeding values for this trade in February of 2020, so just fairly recently. In regards to the 6,000 scores, you can see the histogram of the scores there. You can see that we get lots of 2s, 2.5s, 3s, less 1.5s and 3.5s, and much less outside that range. So you can see what we sort of see in Angus cattle using this scoring system. When we analyse that data as a single trait, the heritability was 0.25. This is just on a linear type analysis. 0.25, which shows that we can do something genetically with it. We can select on it and make some change over time. It's similar to our heritability for yearling weight, for example, so it's quite heritable in regards to a trait and we can do stuff with. We haven't done a lot of research or any really in looking at genetic correlations with other traits at this stage. That's something we'll look to do more in the future. But I do have a slide to share with you in this presentation which does look at correlations between breeding values and selection indexes, so we'll talk about that as well. So we did release a list of research breeding values for coat type in February this year, and this is just the top 25 bulls on the list, but we'll scroll through the rest of them. And as you can see there in this list, we've got the ID of the bull and its name. We've got what cohort it come from, the SIRE benchmarking program. We've got the research breeding value. We've got the accuracy of that breeding value and how many progeny that animal has coat type scored. And we've also got the ABI and the other EBVs listed in the report as well for reference. So when we're looking to interpret this particular breeding value, the thing is you need to think about is coat type research breeding values provide estimates of genetic differences between animals in coat type, as we've described. And most importantly, if you're looking to select on it to breed particularly slicker, shorter hair, if that's in your breeding objective, then the lower, more negative coat type RBVs indicate the animal is expected to have progeny with a shorter, slicker coat. So that's the way to do it. So you can see this particular list, the bulls up the top, the more negative bulls, which you would expect the progeny to have shorter, slicker coats. In regards to the first Australian bull on the list, the first bull was actually a New Zealand bull. The second bull, which I've got a photo of, is a Watara PO Federal, and he had the most negative breeding value for coat type, based on a good number of progeny, 37 at 83% accuracy, relatively high indexing bull as well to go with that, and he would be producing shorter, slicker coat progeny than other bulls lower down on the list, which would have a more positive, higher breeding value in this case. When we do start looking at genetic correlations for these particular traits, again, this isn't a pure genetic sense of looking at them, but what I've done here is I've just looked at the coat type research breeding value in context to the Angus Breeding Index. And as you can see here, a bit of a shotgun approach, not a strong relationship, but it is indicating there is a slight relationship of animals having a higher Angus Breeding Index to a lower, which means shorter, slicker genetics for coat type in their breeding values. Again, this is early days, so I wouldn't hang my hat on these correlations, but something we'll look at in more detail as such and see what that relationship is there. So what are the next steps for this particular research and development area? First of all, we're currently developing a pipeline to deliver regular updated coat type research breeding values. And these are really there to cater for new scores coming in, either from our reference population program, but also for members who are interested in this trait and want to submit them. We're looking to set up that particular pipeline so you can submit it and get the research breeding value back on your cattle. We're also looking to set that up as a single step type of analysis. So if anyone's actually genotyped animals through Angus Australia, using one of our high density profiles from Zoetis or Negen, then you will also get a research breeding value prediction on those cattle as well based on the reference. So that's an important step as well. And obviously one thing we're just looking at now is how do we undergo further research in this area to better understand the relationship between coat type. In the end game is improving heat tolerance in Angus cattle. So that's something we're looking at research partners at the moment to look more at those particular traits. Really the future and where it lies is similar to where the dairy industry has got to now. They've actually got, and this is an example of one of the high heat tolerance breeding value bulls in the Holstein breed. As you can see there, it's a high indexing bull, 109's high in relation to heat tolerance for dairy bulls. They calculate their data primarily off the changes in production in females, so milking, during heat events. That's how they measure that trait. So obviously if a heat event comes through and a particular animals drop their milking compared to other ones that keep milking through, then that's how they measure that trait. So in the end, where we would like to get to as a breed is something similar, where in our suite of breeding values, we've got a heat tolerance breeding value as well, like the Holsteins do. This all fits in nicely with obviously our Northern Development Program in Angus Australia, where the overall goal is to increase utilisation of Angus infused cattle to improve the productivity and profitability in the northern beef supply chain. An important component of that is to facilitate R&D relevant to genetics being used in the north, particularly Angus genetics. And obviously this whole heat tolerance area is a place we really need to focus on to get a lot out of our Northern Development Program and to assist the industry nationally, but particularly in those northern hotter areas. So that's going to be really focused on collaborating in that R&D space. And that's why recently we've appointed a new Northern Development Officer to really progress these programs called Jen Peart, and here's a short video introducing Jen Peart.
Hello everybody, my name is Jen Peart and I'm the newly appointed Northern Development Officer for Angus Australia. I'm based north of Injune in central Queensland on our family-owned beef cattle property. It's a commercial operation and we breed, background and finish organic cattle. I'm very excited about this role. I've always been very passionate about the northern beef industry and focused on producer profitability and production. And I really think that Angus and Angus-influenced genetics have something to contribute to the northern production system. A lot of my role is supporting people who are looking to implement Angus genetics into their herds and those who are already using it. So please feel free to contact me and I really look forward to working with you.